for that beautiful music. Remind the families and the parents that we have pancakes downstairs after this service. And you don't realize what a gift Pancakes and Pajamas Sunday is until you have two kids. You don't have to get them dressed for church in the morning, and it's wonderful. There are inserts in your bulletin, and I do want to encourage you to think about signing up for a fellowship group, fellowship dinner group, or life group. And again, I'll reiterate that we're looking for leaders, somebody who will lead these life groups and help recruit them. So contact Mary Claire or me or one of the ministers if you are open to that or feel called to that. Please join me for a word of prayer this morning. Loving God, speak to us through our text, Matthew's gospel, and may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. You are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Everybody has that crazy relative in your family that you kind of hide from everybody else. You wait until you're married to introduce them to your spouse. It's often this relative that makes holidays and family gatherings very interesting. Thanksgiving, Christmas, funerals, weddings. You know what I'm talking about. Well, for me, that family member was in town this week. Uncle John. Uncle John lives in Florida, and he's a character, to put it mildly. In fact, Uncle John is a preacher down in Florida. He pastors the church that my grandfather started many years ago. And with Uncle John, life is never dull because he's a laugh a minute. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Uncle John. A few years ago, I flew down to Fort Lauderdale, and he picked me up at the airport, and I got into his car. And he had a cassette playing in the cassette player. This was well after CDs had been out for a long time. And I noticed that the cassette was a sermon, and the voice sounded a lot like his. And I said, Uncle John, are you listening to your own sermons in your car? And he looked at me and he said, why, yes. And I said, why are you listening to your own sermons? And with a straight face, he said, because I haven't found anybody any better. And he was serious. Well, every time Uncle John comes to town, he wants to go out on the town. So this trip, he wanted to go to Broadway. It was Tuesday night. It was very cold. Now, let me tell you this. If you hang out on Broadway on a Tuesday night, one of three things is going on. You're either in a band and you play down there. You've gone to a Predators hockey game, and so you're already downtown. Or you have a drinking problem. It's one of those three options. Well, my brother and I took Uncle John over to 12 South, and we told him it was Broadway. So he won't know the difference. So we take him into Mafiosa's on a Tuesday night. Mafiosa's is a happening place on Tuesday night. And we get a table at the patio, and as soon as we sit down, he announces that he's going to go and walk around and recruit people to come to Woodmont. And I said, please don't do that. But off we went. He told people that he was a preacher in Florida. None of them believed that. He said, my nephew is a preacher here in town, and about half of them believe that. And he said, you need to come to Woodmont and come to this church. So if you're here this morning and you met Uncle John at Mafiosa's, I'm glad that you're here. Our family's not like that. He came back to the table, and as we were leaving, he said, you know, you're going to thank me when all these people come to your church. And I said, no, I'm going to thank you when you get on a plane and go back to Fort Lauderdale. But that's my Uncle John. A lot of charisma, a lot of character, a lot of laughs. What is it that makes us want to follow somebody in life? Is it their charm? Is it their intellect? Is it their humor? Is it their charisma? What is it? We started this new sermon series titled Jesus, His Life, Mission, and Message. And I was going to let Uncle John preach this week, but he had to leave on Friday, so you guys missed out. But we're focusing on Matthew's gospel, and will be for some weeks. And I'm challenging you to read and study and reflect upon Matthew's gospel on your own. But let me share just a few general observations with you about Matthew this morning. It's the first gospel that we find in the New Testament, the first book of the New Testament. According to tradition, the author of the first gospel was one of the 12, Matthew, also called Levi, a tax collector. However, recent scholarship says that this may not be entirely true because there's evidence that both Matthew and Luke drew from the Gospel of Mark, which was the earliest gospel. And if that was true, then it couldn't have been completely written by Matthew. However, scholars believe that Matthew came up with the first handbook of Jesus' teachings, and this gospel draws heavily from that. So even if it does incorporate some material from Mark, it still has a lot of Matthew's work in it, and we call it the Gospel according to St. Matthew. Matthew is a Jewish gospel. He is very interested in convincing the Jews that Jesus was indeed the Messiah. He begins with a genealogy in chapter 1 before the birth narrative. It's the only gospel that mentions the word church, that talks about the church. You remember, Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" He says, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus says, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it." Thus we have St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome, which is where Vatican City is. If you've ever been there, you know it is quite a sight, and that is the base of the Catholic Church. Matthew depicts Jesus as having a strong apocalyptic interest, and he talks about the end times. This is a teaching gospel, and there are 5 basic teaching blocks in Matthew that you should understand. The first block is the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through 7. The second block, the duties of the leaders of the kingdom, Matthew 9 through 11. The third block is the parables of the kingdom, found in Matthew chapter 13. The fourth block, community problems that talk about greatness and forgiveness in God's kingdom, that's chapters 18 and 19. And then the fifth and final block is the end of the age, the coming of the king, Matthew 24 to 26. And that contains that famous passage in Matthew 25 called the judgment of the nations. I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. You're familiar with that passage. This morning, I want to ask you a very important question. I want you to think about it today and also in the days ahead. The question is this: what does it mean to follow Jesus? To be his disciple? Remember, there's a big difference between being a church member and being a follower of Jesus. It's not the same thing. There are lots of church members who are not that serious about following Jesus, and there are lots of people who want to follow Jesus who have a big problem with the church because they don't think that the church lives up to the teachings and the life of Jesus and what it says and does. Jesus calls his first disciples in Matthew chapter 4, Peter and his brother Andrew. They're fishing at the Sea of Galilee. He says, "Come, follow me, and I will make you fish for people." Immediately, they drop their nets and they follow Jesus. Are we willing to drop what we are doing in our lives to follow Jesus? Are we willing to be inconvenienced to follow Jesus and to do the things that he tells us we should be doing? What does it mean to follow Jesus today? Well, that question has been answered by many different people, many different preachers, in many different ways. But for me, one of the best answers that I can give to what does it mean to be a Christian, what does it mean to follow Jesus Christ, is that we wrestle with the teachings and the topics that we find in Matthew 5 through 7, also known as the Sermon on the Mount, and we ask ourselves, how are we doing with these things in our own lives? Let me give you an overview this morning. Are you burned out? Are you already running on fumes in this new year? Are you taking the time to tend to your spiritual life? Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven." Do you have a short temper? Do you get angry easily? Jesus says if you're angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. Do you have a wandering eye? Do you think about cheating on your spouse? Are you faithful in marriage? Jesus says everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in their heart. In other words, infidelity starts in the heart, starts in the mind, and then it's carried out. Do you ever feel like you have to retaliate or get even when you've been hurt or when you've been done wrong by somebody? Jesus says, turn the other cheek, go the extra mile, love your enemies, and pray for those who persecute you. Do you ever give or volunteer for charity just so you can be seen and recognized by other people? Jesus says when you give alms, do it in secret, and your Father will reward you. Do you go to church so that others can see you? Do you like to pray in public using fancy words? Jesus says when you pray, go and close the door, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Don't show off. Are you obsessed and totally preoccupied with money and getting rich? Do you think about it all the time? Has money become a god in your life? Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. No one can serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and wealth. Do you worry all the time? Do you live in fear of what might happen or what could happen to you or to your family, to your career? Do you have a problem being present in the moment? Jesus says, don't worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink. Tomorrow will bring troubles of its own. Today's trouble is enough for today. Do you find yourself constantly judging others, looking for their faults and looking for what's wrong with them? Jesus says, judge not so that you may not be judged. The judgment you give will be the judgment you get. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye but fail to recognize the log in your own eye? First, remove the log from your own eye, and then you can see clearly the speck in your neighbor's eye. In other words, try to fix what's wrong in your life before you start trying to tell everybody else what's wrong in theirs. Do you ever wonder why people don't treat you well? Have you asked yourself recently, how do I treat others? Jesus says, try to live by the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It is a timeless ethic. It should be a lifelong mission statement for all of us. Do you ever wonder if your faith is evident in your actions? Jesus says a good tree bears good fruit. A bad tree bears bad fruit. What kind of fruit are you bearing right now? Do you have a problem being honest with yourself? Jesus says, don't deceive yourself. Not everybody who cries, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Are you building a life that can withstand the storms of life when they come, like we talked about last week? Jesus says, know your priorities, know what's most important, build your life on solid rock, and it will withstand the storms of life when they come. See, making a decision to follow Jesus Christ is the most important decision that you will ever make. And we make a lot of other important decisions in life, but that's the most important decision that you will ever make. And it's a journey and not a destination. Will we ever perfectly achieve these teachings that have been said before us? No, probably not. But we're called to work on it every single day and to keep moving in a certain direction. Remember, there's a big difference between saying that we're going to follow Christ and actually following Christ. There's lots of people who can talk about it. There's lots of preachers who can talk about it. James Russell Lowe once said, once to every man and nation comes the moment to decide in the strife of truth with falsehood for the good or evil side. We all expressed our own commitment to follow Jesus when we were baptized, either as an infant or as an adult, when we are confirmed into the church. And just like we find in Matthew's gospel, as soon as we made that commitment, we were immediately put to the test. We're always being put to the test. How well do we survive that testing? Do our lives, our morality, our ethics, both personal and in business, does the way that we treat other people from day to day reflect the commitment that we made at our baptism? Failure to make the right decisions and failure to live up to that commitment quickly leads to a frustrated, restless, disappointed, discontent, and even tragic life. Think of people that you know who are restless and always wandering and searching. Are they really happy? Are they really at peace with themselves? Do they live their life with a mission and a purpose, or do they just drift through life from one day to the next? Jesus said to Peter and Andrew, "Come, follow me." He didn't call them to accept some creed or theology. He didn't call them to debate morality and ethics. He didn't call them to argue over social issues. He didn't call them to form a committee to discuss the good news that he was bringing. But he called them to simply come and follow him, to be in an ongoing relationship. And it became a journey and not just a one-time decision. It started with a decision, but it was a life-changing decision. See, Christianity is not about an institution or a creed or doctrine or theology. It's not about ecclesiastical hierarchies or church politics. It's not about picking the right denomination, the perfect church, or even the right preacher. It's about having a relationship with Christ. And we either have it or we don't. Maybe we have it and we've neglected it for a while and it's time to get it back. Maybe we've been distracted by lots of other things. We're all guilty of letting other things come in and crowd out what's most important, and we know that. So I would say, if it's been neglected, then let's get it back. Let's take this opportunity at the beginning of a new year to get it back and to focus on it and to wrestle with it and to realize that following Christ will change us and challenge us and never leave us the same. Amen.
I was standing by the water in the heart of Palestine. I was talking to my brother. We were cleaning off our lines when we saw a crowd approaching, about 1,000, maybe more. They were following a stranger I had never seen before. Well, Andrew turned to tell me that he'd heard about the man, the claims that he'd been making, the power in his hands. And he said the stranger's message was as simple as can be. If If you want to get to heaven, then you've got to follow me. Follow me. Follow me. I am the door, I am the key. Follow me. Follow me. If you want to see the Father, follow me. Well, that stranger started walking till he was standing by my side. He stepped aboard my boat and said, we're going for a ride. I said, wait a minute, stranger. You know I hate to disagree, but I don't even know you. He said, Peter, follow me. So we set out on the water till he led me to a spot that holds the world's record for the fewest fishes caught. And then he told me I should anchor. I said, stranger, as you wish, but I think you are mistaken. He said, Simon Peter, fish. So we threw our nets once more into the sea, and a sudden hush came over Galilee, till our nets could not control them, and the boat began to creak. Follow me. Follow me. Follow